In 2013, a man named Ted Hallows bolted a GoPro camera to the belly of a small airplane. The footage he captured instantly went viral. Millions of people watched as a single-engine Cessna skimming 100 feet above the highest mountain lakes in Utah opened a valve and released thousands of live fish straight into the open air. No parachutes, no containers, just fingerlings tumbling through the wind like silver rain. People called it a conservation miracle. They called it a dream job, the coolest thing a government ever did by accident. But the viral clip always left out the strangest part of the story. The lakes those fish were dropped into were never empty. And the same airplane that millions of people fell in love with had quietly been doing something nobody filmed. To understand how America spent 70 years filling mountain lakes with fish, you have to look at the geography that broke the old rules. After World War II, millions of veterans came home. Families grew. New highways opened the West. A country that suddenly had time and money to spare went fishing. By the early 1950s, recreational fishing had become a multi-million-dollar industry. States raced to open new waters and stock new fish. The appetite was enormous. Back during the Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps had already poured nearly 1 billion fish into American lakes and streams, building hatcheries from Oregon to the Carolinas. The tradition was a generation old before Utah ever looked to expand it. But Utah had geography that broke the tradition. The Uinta Mountains, the only major east-west range in the lower 48, hold more than 650 lakes above 9,000 feet. Glaciers carved them out of solid granite. Waterfalls sealed them off. Most of these lakes sit 10 to 15 miles from the nearest road, past boulder fields and switchbacks that would snap an axle. And here is the key fact the whole story turns on. These lakes were naturally fishless. Not because the water was bad, but because a trout swimming upstream would hit a 40-foot waterfall and stop. For 10,000 years, nothing with fins ever got past those falls. The first solution was straightforward and brutal. Workers loaded fingerlings into metal milk cans, 3 feet tall, one side pressed flat to ride against a mule's back. A team set out at dawn, the animals climbing 1,000 feet a mile. At night, the handlers laid the cans sideways in running streams to keep fresh water moving past the gills. Trout eggs traveled wrapped in wet moss and chipped ice. The whole operation rode on the endurance of horses and men. One stumble on a granite switchback meant a can of dead fish spilled in the dirt. There were 650 lakes, each needing restocking every few years. With maybe 3 months of open summer to reach them, the math never worked. Then California changed everything. Biologists in the Sierra Nevada had started releasing fingerlings from small aircraft. The fish were so tiny that air resistance slowed them like a falling leaf. Word spread through state agencies, and around 1956, Utah launched its own aerial program. Ted Hallows' hatchery in Camas would eventually become the heart of it. The idea sounded like a prank. Load baby fish into a plane, fly low, open a valve, and let gravity do the rest. But the hard part was never the plane. It was keeping the fish alive on the way down. A fingerling trout is 1 to 3 inches long. It weighs almost nothing. And that is the entire reason this works. Drop something that's small from a moving plane, and it does not plummet. The air catches it. It is the exact same reason a feather drifts while a stone falls. The fish tumble inside a burst of water released from the tank at the same instant. That water cushions them, keeps their gills wet, and breaks the surface tension of the lake below. They hit gently enough to right themselves and swim off within seconds. The aircraft is a single-engine Cessna 185 Skywagon, a workhorse built for short strips and mountain air. The custom tank behind the pilot holds hundreds of pounds of water and up to 84 pounds of live fish, divided into 7 chambers. 7 chambers, 7 lakes, 1 flight, no landing. A single flight can carry over 10,000 fingerlings. A single day covers 40 to 60 lakes. The pilot drops to between 50 and 150 feet, opens a valve, and one chamber empties in a 3-second burst. Then the plane banks toward the next lake. These are not easy flights. Pilots fly at 12,000 to 13,000 feet, where the thin air barely gives the plane enough lift to pull out of a dive. Over 40 years, Hallows estimated he flew around 800 of these runs. Biologists confirmed the method almost immediately. They set gill nets within minutes of a drop and pulled them up. More than 95% of the fingerlings had survived. Every time the footage goes viral, someone asks why we don't use drones or helicopters. The answer is simpler than it sounds. No commercial drone built today can lift 84 pounds of fish and water at 9,000 feet. Helicopters struggle in thin alpine air. They burn more fuel, carry less weight, and cost far more per hour to operate. Even if you paved a road to every lake, the Cessna would still be cheaper. And here is the part Americans tend to love most. This program does not cost general taxpayers a cent. Every fingerling costs about $1 to raise. The whole operation runs on the Dingell-Johnson Act, a federal excise tax on fishing gear, matched with state license money. In Utah, $2 from every fishing license goes straight into the hatchery fund. Anglers buy licenses. Licenses fund hatcheries. Hatcheries raise fish. The plane drops fish. Anglers fish. The system pays for itself, and it has for 70 years. By 2025, Utah's Division of Wildlife Resources stocked more than 11 million fish into over 600 water bodies in a single year. The aerial program is just one gear in a machine so large the state logs every drop in a public database stretching back to 1979. Species, date, lake, number. All searchable by anyone with a browser. The scale is staggering. But for almost 60 years, nobody outside Utah knew any of this existed. Then Ted Hallows mounted that GoPro, and a government fish hatchery accidentally became an internet sensation. The clips only ever showed the falling fish. They never showed the lake before the plane arrived. Here is what the footage never shows. Those alpine lakes were not empty. They were fishless. And fishless was the whole point. The waterfalls that kept trout out for 10,000 years had left room for an entirely different world. Mountain yellow-legged frogs bred in the shallows, their eggs drifting where nothing hunted them. Salamanders worked the banks at dusk. Zooplankton thickened the water until it looked milky in the right light. Insects carpeted the surface every evening. These were some of the last truly fish-free freshwater ecosystems left in North America. Not dead, not empty, complete in a way that had nothing to do with fish at all. Think of it as a biological savings account collecting interest for 10,000 years. Frogs, insects, larvae, zooplankton, all compounding undisturbed, generation after generation. Then the trout arrived. Trout are visual hunters. They went for the biggest, most visible prey first. Tadpoles, larvae, anything moving in open water. One withdrawal after another, and no new deposits coming in. If you have ever hiked into a high alpine basin and felt the absolute silence of a place untouched by the modern world, I want you to hold that thought in your mind. When you look at a pristine mountain lake, do you see a place that is missing something, or a place that is completely whole exactly as it is? The damage showed up first in California. The mountain yellow-legged frog, once so thick that a 1915 survey crew complained of stepping on them, vanished from more than 90% of its historical range. Introduced trout were a leading cause. The tadpoles had no defenses, no speed, no toxins, and no instinct to hide. They had evolved for 10,000 years in water where nothing hunted them. When a visual predator finally appeared, the equation collapsed overnight. The tadpoles in these alpine lakes take several years to metamorphose into frogs because the water is so cold. That meant they were swimming targets for years, not weeks. The trout simply ate them out of existence. The strangeness of what we were doing to the backcountry didn't stop at fish. In Idaho's Frank Church Wilderness, wildlife officials had a beaver problem in 1948. Too many were in the wrong places. Their solution was pure mid-century America. They put the beavers in wooden crates, loaded them onto planes, and parachuted them into the remote mountains. The lead beaver, named Geronimo, rode so many test drops that handlers said he'd climb back into the box on his own. It worked. The beavers thrived. We were, quite literally, airdropping ecosystems into the West and hoping for the best. But in that same wilderness, stock trout had cut frog and salamander numbers. Not just in single lakes, but across entire drainage basins. The airplane that filled the West with fish had quietly been emptying it of something else. The lakes did not come alive when the fish arrived. They traded one kind of life for another. So who is right? This is where the story splits into two honest sides, and both of them have a case. The anglers will tell you, correctly, that this program gave millions of Americans something irreplaceable. 70 years of access to wild country. A self-funded tradition that cost taxpayers nothing. Fish in water that would otherwise sit silent. Take it away and you erase a way of life, not just a hobby. The biologists will tell you also correctly that we did it to some of the last fishless ecosystems on the continent before we even understood what they were. That a frog which survived 10,000 years can be gone from a lake in a single season. The remarkable thing is that the people running the program didn't wait to be shamed into hearing both sides. The reform started quietly, without press releases. Today, most of the trout dropped from Utah's plains are triploid. This is where the real economics of modern conservation come into play. Creating a triploid trout requires a precise, highly engineered process. Eggs are hit with thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch just after fertilization, forcing in an extra set of chromosomes. The result is permanent sterility. It costs the hatchery money to perform this procedure, but that cost buys absolute ecological containment. These sterile fish give anglers a catch without building a population that spreads where it doesn't belong. There is even a financial bonus. Triploid trout grow larger because the energy that would normally go into spawning goes into growth instead. Bigger fish mean happier anglers, which means more license sales, which keeps the hatchery fund full. It is a closed-loop financial model designed around biological containment. Utah's native Bonneville cutthroat now gets stocked carefully back into waters where it historically belonged. But the real work of restoration required more than just swapping the type of fish. In some places, the stocking simply stopped. Biologists had to go in and net out every last fish from select lakes, then step back and let the ecosystem remember what it was. This is expensive, painstaking labor. It requires paying teams of biologists to hike miles into the wilderness, set and check gill nets repeatedly over multiple seasons, and ensure every single invasive trout is removed. If even a few breeding pairs are left, the whole effort fails. The cost is covered by a mix of state wildlife funds, federal grants aimed at endangered species recovery, and conservation nonprofits. There is no immediate financial payoff here. No carbon credit market. No sudden ecotourism boom. The economic return is purely in avoided damage costs. It is the unmeasurable value of keeping an entire species from going extinct, of preserving the genetic diversity of a unique amphibian population that has survived since the last ice age. It is an investment in biological capital that does not show up on a state ledger, but holds immense ecological value. When you pull the fish out of a lake that has been stocked for 60 years, nobody really knows how fast the original ecosystem will bounce back. Some scientists warned it could take decades. The water chemistry had changed. The zooplankton had been decimated. The insect populations were a fraction of what they had been. There were genuine fears that the frogs might have lost too much genetic diversity to ever fully recover. But nature, when given a clean slate, often moves faster than we expect. The first signs came from the shallows, where tadpoles had been hunted to extinction. A few surviving frogs from undisturbed lakes up the drainage began to naturally recolonize the waters. The water itself started to clear as the zooplankton populations exploded, no longer suppressed by hungry trout. The milky tint returned. The evening insect hatches grew thicker. If you have ever doubted that human environmental damage can really be undone, or if you know someone who thinks conservation is a lost cause, you need to hear what happened next. The speed of this recovery is the kind of proof we rarely get to see. If this information changes how you think about what's possible in nature, hit the like button. It helps this channel reach more people who need exactly this kind of evidence. A study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences tracked 5 Sierra Nevada lakes after every single trout was removed. The frogs began recovering immediately. It was not an isolated incident. In the Italian Alps, the Klamath Mountains, and North Cascades National Park, the exact same story played out. Amphibians bounced back within 2 to 5 years. The savings account, which had been drained for decades, began collecting interest again the moment the withdrawals stopped. The native species, pushed to the absolute brink, rushed back in to fill the void they were always meant to occupy. It is not a clean answer everywhere. Deep lakes with rocky shallows still hold frogs and trout side by side. The worst damage hits small, shallow lakes where a tadpole has nowhere to hide. In 2026, the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources published a 30-year plan, openly admitting the program is still being recalibrated against what the science keeps revealing. The default has flipped. The old rule was stock everything. The new rule is stock carefully and prove it won't spread. A single Cessna with 7 chambers, fingerlings 2 inches long fluttering down through mountain air. Hundreds of lakes every summer for 70 years. A method borrowed from California, proven with gill nets hidden for half a century, and then handed to millions by a camera one man bolted to the belly of his plane. Ted Hallows wasn't a villain, and he wasn't a fool. Neither were the men who started this in 1956. They were solving a real problem, giving people more places to fish in mountains a mule could barely reach. What none of them could have known was that empty was never a fact. It was a story we told ourselves about places we didn't yet understand. Sometimes the most ingenious thing a person ever builds and the most consequential mistake they ever make turn out to be the exact same act. It just takes the science a few decades to tell you which. And sometimes the honest answer is that it was both. If you want to see what happens when a state decides to tear out a century of dam infrastructure and let the wild rivers run free again, subscribe for the next documentary.